Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We've been getting a lot of messages from you about, well, the challenges educators are facing these days. It's been really eye-opening.
It has. And going through all of the stories and the research you all have shared, it seems like there's this kind of underlying theme, almost like a hidden force that's affecting everything that goes on in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that really jumped out at us was this article by Shiva Narayan Taxila Page. They really put their finger on something with this idea of forced learning.
Definitely. They make a pretty strong case that forced learning might be at the root of a lot of the burnout and stress we see in education.
Absolutely. So today, we're taking a deep dive into this article, trying to understand exactly what forced learning is, why Taxila Page thinks it's such a big problem, and what they propose we do about it. I mean, have you ever wondered why, like, some learning environments just seem to suck the joy out of learning?
It's a great question, and this article offers some really interesting insights into that.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is forced learning, according to this article?
Well, the article defines forced learning as basically pushing students to learn through things like passive listening, memorizing stuff without really understanding it, and just super rigid instruction. And all of this happens, without any consideration of whether the student is actually ready for that information, if they're even interested in it, or if it connects to what they already know.
So it's like trying to force a puzzle piece into the wrong spot.
Exactly. And what makes it even worse is that it relies on external motivators like grades and rewards or even punishments rather than tapping into a student's natural curiosity.
Right, because kids are naturally curious,
Yeah,
right? That's how they learn about the world.
exactly. And the article argues that by relying on these external motivators, we're actually doing more harm than good. We're creating students who are disengaged, apathetic, and sometimes even, acting out because they're just so frustrated.
It makes sense. If you're constantly being forced to do something you don't understand or care about, you're going to resist. So the article goes on to describe something called the educational chain of frustration.
Right.
Can you break that down for us? Like, how does this forced learning create this ripple effect of frustration?
Yeah, definitely. So the article outlines four stages in this chain. And of course, it all starts with the students.
Makes sense.
They're the ones on the front lines feeling the pressure, the confusion, and, just this sense of helplessness. And I love how the article puts it. They say, quote, "For many students, learning becomes a painful experience rather than a joyful exploration."
Oof, that's heavy.
It is. And this leads to, lower grades, obviously,
Yeah.
but also a loss of interest in learning, maybe skipping school, and in some cases even dropping out altogether. It can really impact their overall well-being.
Yeah, it's hard to thrive in an environment where you feel constantly stressed and inadequate. So if the students are the first link in this chain, who's next?
Well, then the frustration spills over to the parents.
Right.
They
Yeah.
see their kids struggling and they feel helpless. They start questioning the school, maybe even their own parenting, and sometimes they end up directing that frustration towards the teachers, which, doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, it sounds like it creates this really tense dynamic between the school and the home.
It does. And then the frustration kind of spreads outwards even further to the extended family and the peer group.
Oh, I see. So it's like this expanding circle of stress.
Exactly. You start getting comparisons between siblings, like, why can't you be more like your cousin?
Oh,
And peer pressure starts to revolve around grades instead of shared interests or, actual friendships.
yeah, that's rough. So like the whole family atmosphere gets poisoned by this pressure to perform.
Hmm.
And ultimately, where does all this frustration end up?
Well, according to the article, it lands right on the teachers.
Huh.
They're the ones who get blamed when students aren't performing well or if there are behavioral issues in the classroom.
But they're also the ones who were kind of stuck in this system, right? They didn't create it.
Right. They often have very little flexibility in how they teach. They have to follow strict curricula, get kids ready for standardized tests, and it just creates this immense pressure on them to constantly perform miracles with very limited resources.
Yeah, it's no wonder so many teachers are feeling burnt out. So the article makes a compelling case that this forced learning model is creating a lot of problems. But it also delves into why it's ineffective, not just on an emotional level, but like cognitively.
Right. And it boils down to four main reasons. The first one is what the author calls no brain page development.
Brain page development.
Yeah, it's basically the idea that if you're not truly understanding what you're learning, you're not actually creating the neural pathways you need to retain that information long term.
So it's like You can memorize a bunch of facts for a test, but if you don't actually understand the concepts, it's not going to stick with you.
Exactly. It's like trying to learn a language just by memorizing vocabulary lists. You might be able to spit out a few words, but you won't be able to actually hold a conversation.
Right? You need the grammar, the context, the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's what brain page development is all about. It's about building those deep neural connections that make knowledge meaningful and lasting.
Okay, so that's reason number one. What's the second reason why forced learning doesn't work?
Well, the second reason is the lack of motor science involvement. Basically, this means that forced learning often ignores the importance of physical activity and hands-on learning, which are really crucial for making those connections in the brain.
Oh, that makes sense. We learn by doing, right?
Right.
I mean, think about how you learned to ride a bike. You didn't just read about it in a book.
Exactly. Your body was actively involved in the learning process, and that's what helped cement that knowledge.
So if you're just sitting passively, listening to a lecture, you're not really engaging your whole brain in the same way,
Right. And the third reason is that forced learning actually suppresses curiosity.
which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Shouldn't school be about sparking curiosity?
You'd think so. But the article makes a really interesting point. It says that when students are constantly told what to learn, how to learn it, and when to learn it, it actually kills their natural curiosity.
Because it takes away that sense of ownership, right? Becomes about completing tasks, not exploring ideas.
Exactly. And the author beautifully describes curiosity as, quote, the search engine of brain-based learning.
I love that. So we need to keep that search engine running.
We do.
Um,
And the final reason the article gives is that forced learning promotes toxic competition. Instead of collaboration and support, it creates this environment where students are pitted against each other.
oh yeah, like the whole bell curve mentality.
Exactly. And that kind of pressure just leads to anxiety and fear of failure. It takes the joy out of learning and makes it all about winning, even if it means sacrificing your classmates in the process.
It's like the opposite of what education should be. So we've talked about the negative impacts of forced learning on students, but the article also really highlights the emotional toll it takes on teachers.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that teachers aren't just robots dispensing information. They're human beings who care deeply about their students and their well-being.
They're mentors, they're confidants, they're sometimes even surrogate parents.
Right, and they go into this profession wanting to make a difference, but then they get caught in this system that's designed to squeeze every ounce of energy out of them, and it leaves them feeling exhausted and disillusioned.
Yeah, I mean, all the teachers we've talked to have expressed this feeling of being trapped in a system that doesn't allow them to truly connect with their students or teach in a way that feels authentic and meaningful.
Exactly. And the article really drives home the point that forced learning is a major contributor to teacher burnout. It creates this constant pressure to perform, to meet unrealistic expectations, and to manage all the fallout from students who are disengaged and frustrated.
So it's not just about, like, paperwork and long hours. It's about this deeper sense of disillusionment and frustration with the system itself.
Right. And thankfully, the article doesn't just leave us with a bunch of problems. It also offers some really compelling solutions.
Okay, good. Because I was just starting to feel a little hopeless there.
No, there's definitely hope. And the article really emphasizes the need to shift away from forced learning and towards a more holistic, personalized approach to education.
Okay, I like where this is going. So what does that look like in practice?
Well, one of the key ideas the article proposes is moving away from traditional pedagogy, which is like the science of teaching, towards something called learnography.
Learnology.
Learnography. It's essentially the science of learning, and it focuses on understanding how the brain actually learns and creating environments that support that natural process.
Interesting. So it's less about the teacher dictating the information and more about creating the conditions for students to discover and learn for themselves.
Exactly. And the article talks about the importance of things like brain page development, which we talked about earlier, and using student-led learning modules to create more engaging and personalized experiences.
Okay, so that's one big shift. What else does the article suggest?
It also talks about creating what it calls model miniature schools.
Miniature schools.
Yeah, basically smaller learning communities where peer learning and mentorship are encouraged. The idea is that when students teach each other, it deepens their own understanding and it takes some of the pressure off the teachers.
That makes sense. And it also teaches kids valuable social and leadership skills.
Right. And another idea the article proposes is space-guided learning. This is about creating environments that are specifically designed to encourage exploration and interaction.
So like instead of the traditional classroom with rows of desks facing a chalkboard, you might have different learning stations and spaces for collaboration and independent study.
Exactly. And the article also talks about the importance of recognizing and nurturing both emotional intelligence and brain functionality.
Meaning that not all kids learn the same way, right?
Right. And we need to create learning environments that are flexible and adaptable enough to meet those individual needs.
I mean, that just seems like common sense, doesn't it?
You would think so, but the traditional education system is often very resistant to change.
Okay, so we've got learnography, miniature schools, space-guided learning, and personalized approaches that acknowledge individual differences. Anything else?
One more. The article also talks about a technique called cyclizide rehearsal, or TCR.
Cyclizide rehearsal, that sounds intense.
It's actually a very simple but effective technique for reviewing and consolidating information. It involves spacing out your study sessions and using specific prompts to trigger recall and reinforce learning.
So it's like instead of cramming everything in at the last minute, you're consistently revisiting the material over time.
Exactly. And this helps move information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, making it much more likely that you'll actually retain it.
So the article paints a pretty clear picture of the problems with forced learning and offers some really interesting alternatives. But it also goes a step further and gives us a call to action.
It does, and it's a powerful one. The author basically outlines 6 key steps we can take to break free from this cycle of forced learning and create a more joyful and effective learning experience for everyone.
Okay, I'm ready. What are they?
All right. Number 1, empower teachers. Give them the freedom to innovate and trust their professional judgment to create learning environments that actually work.
Makes sense. They're the ones on the front lines. They know what their students need.
Exactly. Number 2, reimagine the classroom. Let's ditch the traditional model and create these vibrant, engaging spaces that encourage exploration, collaboration, and hands-on learning.
Yeah, let's get rid of those sterile rows of desks.
Exactly. Number 3, support the shift to learnography. Let's advocate for models like the Tech-Sheila model and miniature schools that prioritize brain page development and student-led learning.
Right. Let's put the science of learning into practice. What's number 4?
Number 4, engage parents and communities. Let's educate them about the harms of forced learning and work together to create a more supportive and pressure-free environment for learning.
Yeah, it takes a village, right?
Absolutely. Number 5, prioritize emotional well-being. Let's recognize that learning is an emotional process and create spaces where students feel safe, supported, and valued.
Because you can't learn if you're constantly stressed and anxious.
Exactly. And finally, number 6, the most powerful one of all. Say and no to forced learning.
I love it. Just flat out refuse to participate in a system that's harmful to both students and teachers.
Exactly. Let's embrace personalized learning pathways, space-guided learning, and create learning environments that foster curiosity, joy, and a genuine love of learning.
It's a beautiful vision. So, to sum it up, the article makes a really compelling argument that this forced learning model is doing more harm than good. It's creating a cascade of frustration that's impacting everyone involved, from the students to the teachers to the families and communities.
Right. And it's not just about, like, bad grades or stressed out teachers. It's about undermining the very essence of what education should be. A joyful and empowering journey of discovery and growth.
Absolutely. And the good news is that there are alternatives. There are ways to create learning environments that are more effective, more engaging, and ultimately more human.
And the article gives us a roadmap for how to get there.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What's one small change you could make in a learning environment you're familiar with to foster more curiosity and less of that forced engagement?
It could be something as simple as encouraging more open-ended questions, creating a space for students to share their own ideas, or even just taking a few minutes each day to let them explore something they're genuinely interested in.
Every little bit helps. And if you're interested in learning more about these alternative approaches, especially this idea of learnography, the article does encourage you to check out the Tech-Sheila page.
It's definitely worth exploring.
Big thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.